Hello and very welcome to this week's Property Matters, a show that brings global trends to an Irish audience to help shape your knowledge of the industry. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or on email at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts today are Carol Talla and myself, Brian Fox.
Okay, and some of the top stories of the week so far. Hundreds of millions in funding has been allocated to local authorities to bolster the Rebuilding Ireland home loan scheme, which was thrown into doubt following budget overruns earlier this year. Also, last week we reported on the world's first negative interest rate mortgages, which were advanced by a Danish bank. This week we learnt that the fastest growing approved housing body to a housing here in Ireland, which currently has 5,000 homes under management, has secured a 120 million low-interest financing deal to provide a further 2,000 social homes here in Ireland by 2022. And also the Office of Public Works is apparently facing a big levies bill on Dublin's most notorious vacant site on Church Street and Hammond Lane in Smithfield, which had been designated as a children and family law court more than a decade ago. If it is entered on the register, the OPW might be liable for levies up to 700,000 annually to the council from next year.
And according to the Irish Independent, Diago looks set to choose English developer U&I to redevelop St James's Gate as a new city quarter. Ireland has the third highest emissions of greenhouse gas in the EU, according to the most recent European study, which is prompting politicians and industry leaders to call for greater innovation and policy support. Anyone with an interest in PropTech, urban planning and digital construction is invited to attend an event hosted by the CETA, the Construction IT Alliance, tomorrow evening on emergency technologies transforming urban planning at Bank of Ireland down at the Grand Canal. Attendance is free, but booking is essential through the CITA website.
Yeah, that's actually an important event for anybody in the industry. So again, it's the crossover of PropTech, construction tech, digital construction and urban planning. So there will be speakers there in terms of Geodesign Hub, and it starts at 8:15 in the morning down in the workbench at Bank of Ireland down in Grand Canal. Again, attendance is free, but booking is essential through the CETA website, so that's one not to be missed. So, Brian, you might have seen earlier, just at the end of last week, Daft.ie was in a bit of hot water following a Workplace Relations Commission ruling in relation to property rental websites and their advertising on the websites. So, look, a bit of a brief background there, that a case was taken against Daft by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. But it's our understanding that individuals have also taken the case, particularly on the grounds of refusal of HAP, the Housing Assistance Payment. So it essentially is restricting or prohibiting the use of certain terms or phrases in property advertising. So on Daft and My Home, the properties that are for rent advertised, generally they will, there's a certain lingo that's attached. So up until 2015 they might have said rent allowance not accepted. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just looking here, under the Equality and Equal Status Acts 2015, it was no longer acceptable to decline rent allowance in a payment, rent allowance payment in the adverts. So in fact, previously, certainly Daft actually had a box that you could tick to filter out anyone that said they didn't accept rent allowance. Since 2015, that changed, the ruling changed that, and the tick box was gone. So it's
illegal?
It is illegal. Oh, it absolutely is illegal, and it has been since 2015. So this new law doesn't, or this new ruling doesn't change that. But what it does do is it provides a list of prohibited terms. So, for example, now landlords and managing agents who are advertising on behalf of landlords cannot specify that the property is more suited to older or more mature tenants or professional tenants only, or not suitable for children.
But that must open up a whole can of worms then for landlords in terms of, are they not entitled to look for the type of person that they are.
Well, they absolutely are. And look, it raises a question there in terms of enforceability. So actually, the independent.ie did a really good explainer on this. And you know, they've been very rational in their approach to it and very reasoned. And it's their approach that the latest housing ad rules aims to give everyone an equal chance of a place to live. But the upshot is landlords can choose who they rent their properties to. So, you know, if 20 tenants or 200 tenants turn up, they still get to choose from those people. So effectively, really this rule applies to what they can say in their advertising of the property. But
can it also be useful, though, to those that want to rent property, in that they have an idea of what the landlord is looking for as well? So, I mean...
Oh, yeah, it does.
You know, so isn't there...
There will certainly be a law of unintended consequence here, where you will have people turning up. Like, for example, it's no longer okay to say that, you know, this family or this property won't suit a family. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually you might get there and realise actually, you know, there's stairs up to it. You know,
sure.
It doesn't accommodate.
It
doesn't accommodate.
But the point is, though, that you can still rather than turning up to a rental, that you have 200 people that are disqualified. Well, sorry, I should say maybe 50%, 25%
that wouldn't be chosen by the landlord.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly what will happen. But you know, there was a specific question here. You know, say for landlords, the majority of landlords would prefer professional tenants or professional people as tenants.
Yeah,
that's just a reality. And you know, so what's changed is that actually, and by the way, it's really important to stress that the ruling this week doesn't change it. It really just enforces the Equal Status Acts of 2019 or 2015. But it's basically saying it's against the law for you to specify who you want in the property. However, when people turn up to view the property, then absolutely you can choose the best person there. And I think it's important to be quite specific here. So what the Acts specifically refer to is you can't discriminate for people on the basis of gender, marital status, family status, age, disability, sexual orientation, race, religion or membership of the traveller community. And of course, by saying that a property doesn't suit a family, it is discriminating on the grounds of family status.
At the same time, I mean, if the apartment is just a one-bedroom apartment, obviously it's not
going to be suitable
for a family.
Yeah, and in fact, I was doing a bit of research into how estate and letting agents are managing this with their landlords, and one of the things I read was about maybe getting clearer in the property descriptions, so you make it clear to people, you know, so say for example, if it's a property that's accessed via a stairwell only, then that will generally rule out people who have buggies or pushchair or are going to be doing that trip, you know, 5, 6, 7 times a day. So essentially be really descriptive so that people for whom the property won't be suitable, that it will be quite evident that it's not suitable for them, but that you're not saying they're not allowed to come or they're not allowed to have it, but that they essentially can see that it's not suitable for them. But I suppose, look, I think that despite all of the other things that have been covered under these new rules and indeed the Daft case, a lot of it does relate back to discriminating against people who receive rent supplement, housing assistance or any social welfare payments. And that's why there was this insistence on professionals only or having to provide your salary statements or in some cases having to provide your employer references. Now, by the way, there is a bit of ambiguity here, and in fact I've seen discussion forums already break down online over this. One of the prohibited terms is, quote, references required.
Right.
Now, in my opinion, is that references required is too vague. Okay. So I don't think that can be prohibited, because there in some cases, in every case, there would need to be references from previous landlords. So my understanding is that this applies to employment references, but it's really important to state that actually hasn't been clarified. Okay. So we could work on the basis that employer references ought not to be requested, but actually the ruling from the WRC doesn't make this clear. It just prohibits the term references required, and I think it's really important for landlords to get clarification on that, because otherwise it can read like
and it's interesting too that
previous.
The case is to be taken but to the Workplace Relations Commission as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think that surprised people actually. But one of the things that we've known actually for a long time, that the WRC deals with more than just workplace disputes. So actually the Equality Tribunal was actually subsumed into it in 2015. So it now adjudicates on complaints under the Equal Status Act.
Fair enough,
so that's kind of the most important one. I think this is probably the first one of this type that has happened. And, I think the ruling went much further than people were expecting, because actually this battle, dare I say, has been going on for about 3 years that I'm aware, possibly even longer. And like I said, this particular case was taken by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. However, we know that individual cases were taken also. And, specifically, Daft was ordered to take action to block discriminatory ads appearing on the website. But actually, it went further than that and said they had to develop a methodology to make sure that nothing could slip through the net. The working reality of Daft is that people put up, like usually landlords or managing agents for the landlords or letting agents put up adverts, but those adverts can be edited after they go live. So they can be edited, an infinite number of times. Right. So even if there's a mechanism for the ad being checked when it goes live, it can be edited
after that anyway.
Absolutely. And so that's why at the moment Daft said that they have a notify and take down policy. So essentially, if one is noticed, then it will be removed, and any repeat offenders, so landlords or letting agents that are repeat offenders for using these prohibited terms or phrases, that their ads that they might actually be suspended. Now, for a professional landlord or for a landlord with many properties, and for a letting agent, being suspended from Daft would be critical to the business.
But isn't it a point though that when the moderator or the curator, if you're adjusting your ad at all on any of these sites, it goes to the moderator first before it's put online again?
Well, that wouldn't be the case with property listings. No, in fact, there's actually an automated process whereby property listings for sale and for rent can be updated daily to keep them on top of the.
So you
get them on top. So in fact, in some cases, that might be an automated process and mightn't even be done by the agents in question. So, so from Daft's point of view, I can see that this is a particularly difficult one to police, and I suppose taking the technicality of the wording. Mm-hmm. And the advert, and this is one particular website, I'm not sure that this actually achieves the aim. And the aim is to make rental accessible to everybody equally. And that's just not the reality, because there's a supply and demand issue here. We have a lot greater demand than we have supply.
Besides that too, before you go to the landlord with we'll call it discriminatory language, what exactly the landlord is looking for. And in those terms then, whether it's worth your while visiting or not.
Oh yeah, there's a huge amount of time will be wasted on both sides.
So my other point is here, my other query to you would be this, that during the year too we've been covering legislation, and we know, like with the last piece of legislation with the Rental Tenancy Board, that it's becoming somewhat more difficult now for landlords to evict people, etc., etc., etc. Will this now put people off, landlords advertising or landlords rentally again, because of their caution in wording ads for a start, and then having to spend several hours there trying to screen people as they're coming through?
Well, absolutely is the short answer there. Absolutely, but we've been entering into such an onerous liability for landlords over the past decade. This just seems like one further step, and actually I'm delighted we're going to be joined in studio this evening by Stephen O'Sullivan from PPN Dublin, and that's a network of landlords. So I'm really interested to hear how landlords are, not only this particular ruling, but actually how landlords are dealing with a more burdensome more burdensome legislation and returns, a more difficult financing arrangement. It's a difficult environment for landlords on a whole host of measures. Certainly, it's not very attractive for individual and private landlords, people who only have one or two properties. It's not an attractive proposition at the moment. So I am interested to hear.
Before we go to a break, maybe you could answer this as well. Are there any other countries that have adopted this type of legislation as well? I mean, I remember when I was in London, the UK and in the US, I mean, you always knew what you were going to. You had a fair idea of what you were going to. By reading the ads, and the location, etc., etc.
Actually, I don't know, and it would be interesting to learn how this is, if it is indeed being practiced in other jurisdictions. It would be interesting to see if and how it is being enforced, because again, it is really important to be clear that these rules apply only to the advert. That landlords still have complete freedom to choose the best tenant.
I accept that, I understand that, but just from the point of view of the advertising, it's such an important part of the whole process, of the whole, the whole deal.
It is, but again, I don't think that this is achieving the aim that it is trying to achieve, which is making rental accessible and equally accessible to everybody. That's not going to happen while we have more demand than we have supply. So in fact, the way to achieve this is to deliver more homes to the private rented sector and for social housing. And in fact, you saw there that in our headlines there, we led with the story that Tua Housing, which is one of the, I think it is actually the fastest growing approved housing body in Ireland, so formerly Housing Association, and they currently have 5,000 homes under management, social homes under management, and they've accessed by accessing lower interest rates for longer, they're actually going to be in a position to deliver 2,000 new social homes. And I know that they're also involved in the cost rental model, which we discussed here. I think we'd John O'Connor from the Housing Agency in a couple of months ago, talking about the cost rental model in Ireland, which is going to be transformative for social housing because it's linked to the cost of delivering and managing the units as opposed to market increases and fluctuations. That's where we need to get to for social housing. Social housing needs to be on a cost rental model. It can't be subject to the market, and in fact that's one thing that the market is very clearly teaching us at the moment. So I think the workability of this, I understand the
and
ruling.
And the enforceability of it.
But again, I understand the ruling. I just don't think it is the right solution to deal with the problem. I think it's the right problem to be targeted, but it's the wrong solution for it.
Just a bit of political correctness as well.
Well, online, that was certainly one of the things. And look, my own opinion is I understand why this case is important, but I think there's been an overcorrection. However, having said that, this is the ruling. Yeah. These are the new rules, and it's important to point out for landlords and for letting agents that compensation payments can be several thousand euros but can go up to 15,000 for breaches. So this is genuinely important. And by the way, just a little bit of, I suppose, additional information there. 104 HAP related complaints were referred to the WRC last year. So that's 104 people who felt that they weren't given fair treatment in their search for rental accommodation because they were in receipt of HAP. So I think that's an important one.
Significant, yeah.
But look, we need to take a quick commercial break now. Join us after the break and we'll be speaking to Paddy Conlon of CBRE to talk about the launch of the International Proptech Challenge.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
And you're welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Carol Town and myself, Brian Fox. So as Carol mentioned there before the break, in the studio with us now is Paddy Conlon, director of CBRE.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Brian.
So perhaps you would tell us, you were involved with the PropTech Challenge competition with CBRE. Sponsor?
Well, the PropTech Challenge itself is actually something that's it's a CBRE initiative that was the genesis of which actually came out of our Spanish office. And our Spanish office actually have probably put the rest of the European network to shame slightly in terms of their attitude and their ability to sort of engage in the PropTech sector as well. So essentially what they did, this is the third edition of the PropTech Challenge. They started the event on a small scale a couple of years ago. And they've gradually ramped up each year. So it's a Spanish idea. Sponsored event, yeah.
Oh, Spanish, okay, yeah. And it's global.
It's it's a European PropTech Challenge is
okay,
essentially what it's billed as. But ultimately, there's no restriction on where the entrants for the competition come from. So
I see. Okay.
while there's probably 8 leading countries behind it, essentially there's no restriction on where those entrants come from. So.
Very good. Now, you are leaders more or less in corporate estate. You're corporate estate agents, basically.
Correct. Yeah.
How is the market at the moment?
Extremely buoyant.
Is it?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, without there's certainly plenty of noise going on at a macro level globally. But certainly, as far as Ireland's concerned, strong both on the sort of capital market sector of the market, which is just there's a lot of capital chasing product within the Irish market. And that's probably buoyed by the fact that there's very strong occupational markets, certainly on the offices side. So
in Dublin, I would take it, or nationwide?
That is, I suppose, fair to say predominantly Dublin, but certainly there's been good activity throughout the country as well. So we're seeing good positivity, good growth. And just, there's a well-beaten, there's a tried and tested path now within the Irish market.
And is there any particular sector? I know you mentioned capital goods there, but I mean, any particular sector that is doing anyway more active at the moment and looking for?
I suppose my main focus is in the offices market, so looking at the office leasing and the occupational market. So that has been an area that's been particularly strongly performing. There is, depending on sort of, there's a lot of activity at the moment in the industrial sector as well. So just in terms of manufacturing, logistics.
Really?
Yeah, just in
with
terms
data centres particularly.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And I think some of it's linked to what contingency planning is in place for sort of Brexit and what sort of warehousing is required, logistics, and what Ireland's going to need its own infrastructure in that space.
There's been a lot of publicity given to data centres lately. Are you picking up many inquiries in relation to data centres in the moment?
It's not an area that's, but we have a strong team led by a colleague of mine, Gareth McLean, and who's very active in the sector. So he's
on the office side of it, do you have an opinion about the WeWork IPO? It must be one of the most controversial IPOs we've seen in the last decade.
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly there's a lot of noise about it. That's for certain. They've come in and done something to our sector which has been incredibly interesting in terms of probably taking advantage of. A sort of probably what PropTech is about, to be honest, which is the sort of ability of our industry to be more nimble when we're dealing with putting the occupiers together with the owners of real estate and just allowing you to deal with things. So WeWork just came in with a completely different model. The finances aside, what they're doing is incredibly interesting.
It is, but I think we actually had a special show here on co-working, and we had Joe McGinley from Bespoke Office, and I think that they're an Irish company who are really leading the field in this. But one of the things we talked about during that show were kind of some of the structural challenges to I suppose the future of work and offering space as a service, this new very trendy or on-trend term. But some of the structural challenges that came up were things like the financing. So, for example, for landlords, how, when they're letting for short-term lets, there's a challenge there in terms of financing. Their financing still won't allow it. So are we at a point where offices will need to go to the very large WeWork as opposed to smaller startup SMEs? Are Irish Indigenous startups and SMEs being pushed out of the private rental and into co-working space, whether they like it or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality of co-working, I suppose, as a model, it's sort of buy long, sell short in terms of, they're getting a premium for offering that flexibility. And that's a premium that, I think it's fair to say is probably the occupiers are maybe slightly more ambivalent about whether they use WeWork or whether they use landlords directly, but the WeWork model is geared up for it. it's been proven, and that the WeWork model is that they're willing to pay this premium, so landlords can capture that premium. And indeed, I think you're looking at some landlords who have scale, who are willing to sort of look at and say, do you know what, some of my portfolio I want to have long-term leases and lock them down. But there's other assets that I can actually be very comfortable just doing short-term and rolling leases. And that's probably a model that will evolve as well, because...
Yeah, I presume it depends on the marketplace as well, because I think, back in 2011, 2012, there was still an oversupply of offices in the Dublin market, and, there was a lot less certainty in the market. So it was a good business model to be introducing it there, whereas now it's actually putting pressure on maybe the traditional office side. But Paddy, I'm so sorry, we're taking you off course in terms of the PropTech Challenge, because I think this is really exciting, and it's a space, we dedicate, 1/3 of the show every week to talk about PropTech. It's an area that we're very excited by and passionate about. So can you tell me how the challenge is actually going to work, and really what you'd like to see from innovators, particularly coming out of Ireland?
Yeah. So, thanks, Carol. I suppose for us, as I say, it's a 3rd edition, but for us, it's really our 1st edition. So it's our opportunity to really get on board and see what Ireland has to offer, and basically try and put us on the map. So we're wearing sort of 2 hats: one of being supportive to this PropTech Challenge, but clearly there's a motivation internally to see Ireland succeed in terms of its how it plays out within the challenge itself.
PropTech Ireland is very motivated to help.
Yes, I'm sure.
But it is important. As a small country, we actually have some really strong, particularly on the digital construction side of things. We have some really strong innovators who maybe aren't delivering in the Irish market, but they're in the UK or the US or Canada or in South America delivering. So I think it's really important that innovation coming out of Ireland is actually used in Ireland as well, and supported and funded in Ireland, and that's maybe not happening at the moment. So I think CBRE coming in at this stage is really important.
Yeah, and listen, I think if you look at the ingredients that Ireland has, it's within the DNA is entrepreneurialism, and within the DNA is property. And so if you put those 2 bits together, you've got essentially you're trying to mix what PropTech is all about, which is people trying to collaborate, innovate within an area that can make a meaningful difference. Because I often tell the story, and Carol, you may have heard this before, but I sat in the Web Summit a couple of years ago and listened to, I think it was one of the Collison brothers, talk about what they would do if they sold Stripe in the morning, and essentially their answer was that they'd pick the biggest sector they could possibly look at and look to disrupt it. And it made me sort of squirm in my seat, because essentially we're a very traditional industry that need to sort of try and collaborate and change from within. I don't think we should be afraid of that, and that's really what the essence of what...
And how's that change going for you in terms of adjustment to it?
Like any change, it's a challenge, but it's it's interesting to be a part of. I think culturally you've got to change the way you are, because you do get sort of set in your ways, especially. And
do you see it as disruptive to the business?
I mean, it's disruptive. Is it a positive or negative? If you put disruption in a positive light, that's what I'm hoping it sort of comes out to be. You do have great innovators doing great things in the property space in Ireland. I mean, you mentioned Joe in terms of what he's done.
Absolutely.
And harnessing that and creating an ecosystem on that, the work that Carol's doing, it's that that's important from our side, and CBRE supporting that and trying to bring our network to that.
And actually, certainly 4 years ago, 4 and 5 years ago, when we started our first doing this and actually working with innovators, what we saw very clearly was that most of the innovation was consumer led. So it was people who had experienced difficulties and were out to solve the problems, and they were coming up and knocking on closed doors, and it was difficult. And that was kind of one of the things we did, was to be a bridge between. But actually what we've seen, which very much follows US trends and kind of really more recent UK trends, is that the industry has really picked up on the innovation now. I mean, it's something we saw with Sherry Fitzgerald introducing the online bidding.
That's what I want to put it to Paddy, actually, because is there any accident that was started in Spain 3 years ago or 4 years ago?
Yeah, listen, they've got a very sort of forward-thinking team over there, certainly within the CBRE side. So,
but are they more developed prop tech wise there as well?
I'm not necessarily sure if that's. I mean, listen, they wouldn't have what we have on our doorstep in terms of some of the biggest tech companies on our doorstep with, as I say, this inbuilt DNA that's focused on this area. So again, we probably weren't focused enough on it.
I wonder, is that because, and I know I spent a couple of years studying the Spanish market a couple of years ago, particularly in terms of SARB, the NAM equivalent over there, and I think that a huge part of it is that innovation comes really when the marketplace isn't in a good place. So I actually think that in a way Ireland recovered almost too quickly and too smoothly, although it certainly didn't feel like it to us at the time.
That's interesting.
Whereas in Spain it didn't happen like that. It was much patchier. It was it really wasn't. It was in a more convoluted terms of recovery, and I think that actually that's the kind of marketplace that drives innovation. So in a way I think the industry almost had when we started to recover, the path to recovery was almost too smooth, that innovation wasn't needed, it wasn't necessary, it wasn't demanded. And what we were seeing was that the innovation coming in was client-led. So, for example, particularly in the data centre side, when we looked at that, it was, US or multinational clients coming in and demanding a higher standard, or demanding, for example, on the technology side, BIM and other technologies. So I think in Spain, the market not recovering to the same extent or at the same pace as Ireland, I think drove a lot of innovation over there, and that was certainly something we saw.
Itself, yeah.
But I think Ireland's catching up now.
I think it's catching up. I mean, listen, it's probably victim of our own success in terms of when you've got the big tech giants growing. There's loads of opportunity outside that area. So where the opportunity is less, people have to innovate more and try and maybe come up with some of these solutions. So that's probably what's driven a lot of it. I would say, just Brian, come back to your point, just in terms of what type of technologies we're seeing. So just the second edition, last year's one, was an interesting sort of dynamic, because there was about 180 entrants, and actually the majority of those entrants sat in a space which was either driven by marketplace solutions. So how can you clean up or make the marketplace more active? So you mentioned what Sherry Fitzgerald are doing, or what Offer are doing, or what BidX1 are doing in terms of that ability to transact property, which certainly doesn't, it needs to be constantly considered. But also in terms of the property management or the facility management of property. So the lion's share of projects are very definitely focused on that space. There are other areas that look at sort of IoT, big data, AI, and just that augmented reality type vision as well. VR, so it's really, there's a real cross section. So I suppose what we're looking for is really to harness as much of that Irish ecosystem that's out there, is doing work in this space. Even and the beauty of the PropTech Awards itself is certainly there's an award category that looks at somebody who has proof of concept and they're sort of moving forward, but there's somebody as early as if you've just got an idea, and there's an ideas category that it doesn't even really need the meat on the bones. It can be the bones of an idea, which is interesting.
That's actually an amazing opportunity. I was at your office the night of the launch event, and afterwards, there was a discussion about it, and that was one of the points that innovators and startups came back to, because normally to apply for these awards or to showcase an idea, you have to have hit a few particular milestones or things to show, whereas to come in at idea stage, and I think you made the point, Paddy, that actually the outcome there it's not well defined, but actually you've flexibility there in terms of there might be solutions that could be developed alongside CBRE. Now that's an amazing opportunity for some innovators that I haven't seen a similar type early stage idea collaboration in any of the other international PropTech awards, and I think that might actually suit people who are doing some of these very large projects that actually require a heavy amount of capital investment in order to even get to proof of funding stage. And the fact that CBRE works with some of the largest occupiers in Ireland, there's a great opportunity even to allow access in for testing environments. And I mean, how much are you tapping into your client base and maybe seeing, what problems do you have? What solutions should we be looking at?
Yeah, actually, so interesting you mentioned that. So the first PropTech session we're going to have next week, we're going to have a meetup next Tuesday evening, which is so the Tuesday the 3rd. Details of it are on the PropTech website, so proptech.cbre.eu. And essentially what we're looking to do is identify with some assistance from clients of where the gap is in property, so where they're feeling points of pain. So I mean, what that's doing is probably, and there's a reason that's at the very start of these meetups, which is probably given the time for somebody who might just be at the embryonic stage of an idea to kind of take it away and just think whether it's got a relevance in the property world as well. So that's themed. We do have a couple of other themes around the areas of PropTech finance, big data. So we've got some contributors who are coming into some of the meetups. So it'll just give some guidance, hopefully, to some of those people that need.
And actually that's really important, because one UK study last year actually showed a massive disconnect between maybe innovators and people who would be the end buyers of those solutions. And so what we saw was that I applaud innovation in all of its forms, but not all innovation, actually the way it was summed up was not all problems are a priority to solve. And I think that there's been a bit of a disconnect here, and that's why it's so important that we tap into the industry and to the end consumers or users of these spaces to see what problems actually we need to be prioritising, because PropTech is still evolving. It's still at reasonably early stages. So like the US is ahead of, Ireland isn't that far behind the UK, but certainly, we're a couple of years behind the US. But even there, it's not a mature sector. We still need to prioritise. The funding is still low in relative terms. Yep. So we need to prioritise the problems that we're going to solve. And I think that's particularly true in Ireland, because it's just such a small marketplace.
Can you see any improvement in the funding of these projects?
Yeah, so I mean, we were chatting just before we came on air, just in terms of those sort of funding levels, which you're certainly seeing just incrementally are growing. So you're probably a lot like when possibly fintech was 5, 7, 8 years ago. We're probably at a similar stage in terms of PropTech. So funding gone from probably somewhere around 14 billion to 10 billion at the mid-year mark. We were discussing earlier, Carol, but that sort of funding levels is something that Ireland really needs to tap into in terms of, and that's the aim of this program. So.
Yeah. And actually, just I suppose before we finish up, in terms of the funding, one of the things that we have seen is that while Enterprise Ireland maybe is the primary funder of early stage businesses, most of the angel or venture funds has come from the industry itself. So as in property developers, construction company owners in their personal capacity are investing in these PropTech startups. So I think that's a really interesting vote of confidence as well. Paddy, you might just remind people where to go, which website to go for access.
Thanks, Carol. So the best website is if you go on proptech.cbre.eu, and on there you'll find details of the challenge itself, which is the Irish leg is going to be done in November, with the finals in Spain in early 2020.
Okay, exciting stuff. Paddy, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about that, and maybe we'll come back in and see as the competition progresses, and we'll touch base on that again. So that was Paddy Conlon of CBRE. Thank you again for joining us. Coming up after the break, we have Stephen O'Sullivan of PPN Dublin.
Paddy.
Your community radio for South Dublin. This is Dublin South FM.
And you're very welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. It's with myself, Brian Fox, and Carol Tolan. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio, or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So as mentioned, as Carol mentioned before the break, we have now Stephen O'Sullivan in. And Stephen, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us, guys.
You are from PPN Dublin, so maybe you'd explain how you became involved with that.
Basically, it's Progressive Property Network Dublin. It's kind of a property meet-up group. After the recession there, I kind of wanted to see about getting some education, and I couldn't really see it in local or in Dublin.
Were you investing in property during the recession?
Yes, and
so you got hit, you got walloped like the rest of us.
One or two things went a bit south, and one of my relatives got a bad deal as well, so I kind of wanted to reach out and see what was out there, so I wasn't finding much online, so I reached out to the UK, and PPN, Progressive Property Network, up and down the whole UK, educating people on property and doing courses and whatever. So I was over and back doing a few courses, and then a friend of mine, when I got to know him, I was running a place in Belfast, a Belfast property meet, and I used to go up there on a first Thursday every month, up and down.
Yeah.
And he said, why don't you set something up in Dublin, because there must be other people. So a lot of people were coming up to me because I'm a little bit involved in property myself. So I said, I think there might be an appetite. So we started up a couple of years ago, and it's just been growing and growing, you know.
Yeah, and you see, I suppose I'm familiar with property, well, PPN as well, actually, because that started at the time of my first property business back in, I think that started about 2005, 2006. So we were in the marketplace. Well, they actually probably started around 2003 or 4, but we were in the marketplace at the same time. But actually, I can remember before the crash, there were several property networks that used to meet, usually in the basements of Dublin 4 hotels, and they were always so well attended. But I think what was unusual is the level of sharing. We just weren't familiar with that, because actually Irish landlords and investors tend to be very
careful.
Very careful. They just don't
You
talk
be
about
careful
things. You know, so I think that really surprised me. And I think with PPN in Dublin, you meet every month, is it?
The first Tuesday of every month there in the Sandymount Hotel, and we just encourage people who want to share their experience with other people.
The sharing is important, though, isn't it?
Sharing is good, bad, and the ugly, and there's a lot of learning from the deals.
And would you get many
the
members?
deals. Oh, we'd have, I think, over 1,000 on our mailing list, and we meet up every month, and we make it 40 or 50 people every month, and we talk about different property strategies that'll be out there. Some you were talking about earlier on there, from buy-to-let to the professional let, and I'm interested about you just spoke about
about the new rules. And actually that's one thing, because actually normally on the show we have letting agents or managing or estate agents in, and by the way, that's not because we haven't asked landlords. Landlords won't come in and talk to us. That's just the reality. And by the way, I can say from
shy,
they just don't talk about it, and
siloed.
I actually, on a weekly basis at least, I get journalist requests in, can you send us a landlord to talk to? And I always say a landlord will speak to a journalist. They just won't allow their name be used, and they won't be photographed. And then, of course, the papers won't read it or won't write it. But then I always feel that we're missing a perspective on the market. And I felt that during the early days of the crash as well, because I knew from being involved in some of the property networks that there was absolutely an appetite there, despite the fact that economists were saying, you know, the property market is in a shambles and don't do anything, there was no mortgages available, and people were saying there was no money. But I could see in these rooms there absolutely was money, there was cash there, and people wanted to put their cash into property, and that was a perspective that wasn't anywhere in the media. And at the time I was a columnist in the Sunday Business Post, and I would try to convey as much as I could there without breaking any confidentiality, you know, the confidentiality of the meeting. But I feel like we're almost back in this again. We never seem to hear from the private investor, the private landlord. So, you know, earlier today, earlier today in the show, myself and Brian were talking about the new rules for property advertising, and it feels unfair to keep saying daft, because actually these rules apply no matter what website you're on. It just so happened that daft was in that. You know, Stephen, have you gotten any feedback from your members on this yet?
Well, our meeting's next week. I was on holidays before that came in, but some of the strategies would be looking at, you saying don't advertise for HAP, but some of our group would just, in their particular area, HAP works for them fine every day of the week, and they've no problem with HAP.
Actually, I think that's actually worth expanding on a little bit, because I don't know that people are aware of this, that there are actually landlords who only want to deal with.
I actually had a friend. I have a personal experience, and he was very, very happy. Now, to a large degree, they were immigrants, but I mean, and I suppose immigrants has got that tabooed association now. But as far as he was concerned, they were excellent tenants and paid up and had no problems with, and kept the place.
Well, a lot of strategies are different. But might be someone's holding it for the long term, and they're cash flowing a little bit every month, or substantially if the loan to value was very good on it. But if they're in there for the long term, they're looking for slow capital growth, maybe in that area. Where they're coming to city centre, they might be looking for a different strategy.
A different type.
Some people might be looking for professional lets, because that strategy doesn't work in that area. So it's horses for courses, and you might have students in another area. Or nurses near hospitals or whatever. So there's no magic bullet here. It's whatever strategy works in different areas. So,
yeah, no,
and that's what we
absolutely.
look for.
And I think that used to be particularly true with the properties we referred to as pre-63s. You know, they were a certain type of property that required an absolutely certain type of management style, but they also attracted a certain type of tenant, and that was just the reality. That was the business model. That was what worked, and it continued to work. And they were exceedingly profitable when other Dublin properties were yielding 5% and 6%. Even during the crash, they're way down on that now. These properties were 10 and 11 and 12%.
Yeah.
So again, it's how much work you're willing to put in. I think people forget that being a landlord actually requires work.
It does a lot of work, and a lot of people are doing the Airbnb model, which has got a bad rap lately. But for some landlords during recession, even if a tenant was gone, wrecked the house, they said, what can I do here, because I'm putting so much money every month to this. So some of them moved out.
Have you many members that are doing short-term lets?
We would have, yeah, but they're trying to have to change that strategy now.
I was about to say, have any of them applied for planning?
Yeah, well,
Or have they been successful?
No, they've changed their strategy, because we said this was coming in 6 months, whatever, and some of them might have turned their strategy into something else.
But it's been very badly enforced, though, Paddy, hasn't it? The enforcing of the planning law and planning permissions.
That's all going to start happening. With local councils are going to start looking at that in more detail.
Yeah, but it came into effect on the 1st of July, and I think around the first week of August we covered it under the news here, and in fact the level of registrations had been very low. There was kind of 2 and 3, and some counties, some local authorities that had zero number of registrations.
So some people maybe not do that going forward, and might look back at the student model or a different strategy. So with the advertising you were just talking about beforehand, how is that going to affect some of that as well?
How do you think it will affect you from that point of view? I mean,
well, this is only new to me, so
it's only literally new this week.
We'll discuss it next Tuesday night as well and get some feedback.
You know, but that'll be important to hear, because again, you know, oftentimes we just don't get the feedback from the individual landlords. And I think, by the way, it's really important to specify that, or to really state that most landlords in the market today are credible and reputable landlords, and they want to comply with the increasingly onerous legislation.
This is why we kind of set this up. Anyway, there's one or two other groups around Dublin that I found since and whatever, and IPO and all those, but those starting off, where do they go? So if you're trying to get a group of like-minded people, and we've first time newbies coming in, those have 1 or 2 or 3 properties, and a lot of landlords only have 1 or 2 properties and don't know how to scale up.
And that would tally with the residential tenancy board figures as well. They say that most landlords would have less than 2 properties.
Because of the Airbnb model, I said, look, I can't. There's no return on this for me, because I had to go to Airbnb. Those that were stuck in the recession, so it's different courses for different people.
Now, this is interesting and slightly off topic, but we are actually we have a bit of a focus on the vacant homes movement that's going on at the moment. There's a huge push to try bring vacant properties back to use. However, I've spoken to people who have inherited property or somehow acquired property, and they're deliberately leaving it vacant because they don't want to be landlords. So as in, they want to own property, they want their money in bricks and mortar, they want that to appreciate, they hope, over time, but they don't want to be landlords. So
and they might have the money to bring the house back up to good standard.
But there's so many schemes available, actually. The lease and repair scheme, there's about 5, 6 or 7 schemes through the local authorities for funding to bring... actually, there's 8.
I think that's the problem with Dublin City Council, or South Dublin County Council. There's a very little small take-up.
A lot of people that own the housing stock probably don't want to get into that space.
And that's exactly it. They don't want to be landlords. So how do we... So I actually think that you've identified a real problem here, that actually we want to bring vacant homes back into use, and they're owned by individuals who are not professional landlords or landlords of any type, and they're quite intimidated by it. So maybe we do need a very introductory way.
Another thing to look at is like the fabric of the building. A lot of these old buildings, unfortunately, aren't up to a good standard, and they need a total fabric upgrade, which I know there's some grants out there for.
But there's grants up to 40,000. That would do a lot for some of these older vacant properties. You know, you're not going to put in septic tanks, so you're not going to...
Dublin Council set up the Living City initiative,
yeah,
but that was only in a certain zone as well.
Yeah,
and it hasn't worked 100% the way they want. It came from
There hasn't been great take-up on that,
No.
but I would also say, from a communications point of view, there hasn't been great promotion of it. And in fact, we saw that with the lease and repair scheme. The first year it was introduced, some counties had 0 applications. So in fact, after about 15 months, they had to review it, change the communications around it, change some of the rules, increase the grant that could be given, lower the time that you had to give your property over to the local authority to be rented as social housing. So there were changes and tweaks made. So I do think there's schemes out there that are not well communicated by the local authorities, but that could benefit.
I think there's a great opportunity, because how many people are driving up to Dublin every day from their own towns or villages and seeing just getting dilapidated, and nobody wants to see that. So should be a big push to regenerate.
Well, actually,
towns. And maybe that's
happening at the moment. You can
and
register.
bring a bit of industry down.
Yeah.
Not all of the M50 or the M1 come to Dublin, you know.
Yeah, well, look, I think that's a great point. There's a couple of initiatives there that we've covered on the show so far. Work remote is one where people, there's actually an initiative going in regional hubs all around Ireland. You know, we've some in Dingle, it's up in, I think, there's several in Sligo and Mayo. There's one in one in Wexford. You know, all of these work remote hubs where like-minded people are coming together. It is co-working, but it's not a co-working offering. It's a work remote offering. So I do think that's an important point. But in terms of people who are driving and passing vacant homes, I would definitely urge people that Mayo County Council has the vacanthomes.ie website where you can go on and register a vacant home. So it's really important to do that. But it doesn't address the owners of these properties that don't want to let them out.
And access to funding.
I do think that there's funding available there that hasn't been taken up. We know that
there's no motivation there for that person then, because there's the
problem.
They probably haven't got the skill set, or they're just looking for the higher price for the property.
I think,
and a lot of our before that grant came in was the refurbish costs and associated works to bring up to a standard and return on your investment. You had to walk away sometimes.
You see, we know there's funding there. I actually think it's back to the first challenge you mentioned, which is people don't want to be in a position of being landlords. So why is that? Is that because, again, they don't really understand what their responsibilities are? There's a lot of scaremongering. In the headlines.
But maybe you'd respond to that. Is there not a scaremongering at the moment, or what's your reaction to the legislation that went through the houses there before it broke up for the summer? I mean, will landlords be happy enough now to be renting their properties with the conditions that they're in now in the rental tenancy board?
From what angle are you talking about?
Well, from the point of view of eviction, from the point of view of renovations, from the point of view of all that sort of stuff, you know?
Like any landlord just wants to get a good tenant, pay their way, and
now
that's the bottom line.
You just said any landlord wants to get a good tenant. Does that not bring this show full circle? Because we started by talking about the restrictions when advertising for a tenant.
Yeah.
So now I understand you said a good tenant is a tenant that fits the property, and there are different strategies.
But you can always get a bad one in every strategy that you're using.
Of course. Yeah.
So,
I look. Tell me the challenges, because I know that part of your meeting is that people actually share challenges that they're having around tenants. You know, there is, from a landlord's point of view, have the notice periods been extended too long? You know, are tenants allowed stay, and are they allowed overholding a property too long?
It's just when things go wrong, it's so complicated to get them out into cost. Look, everybody knows that, but as I said, we try to encourage everyone to come and speak, tell their experience, and then anyone who's starting out will get a bit of education. It is education, and you're a bit more equipped then going forward, because we'll have newbies starting off and have nowhere to go, and they're very welcome to come and listen. We have a guy from Galway now next Tuesday night showing a couple of a deal that he did, and happy to share the pros and cons, the weaknesses of what he took to get it over the line, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so this is a landlord who's going to address
it's just a strategy. He's going maybe for student led.
Okay.
He also does a service accommodation, but he has to change that. So he's sharing his challenges. So it's in that strategy. So every month we change it around.
And how?
And then we also bring in a professional, like passive house standards coming in, NZEB.
Yeah,
so
that's an important one coming in at the end of the year.
So a lot of people aren't aware of that, and we've been saying that people want a good housing stock. So what is your BR rating? Maybe before the BR rating wasn't number one. It's always location. But if the housing stock is not up to good standard, 6 months in, there's probably a problem with the house. So that's when people are trying to buy some of these older properties to bring them up to a good standard. That's where it could fall down sometimes.
Briefly, Paddy, do you think, are people nervous of becoming landlords nowadays?
Sorry?
Are people nervous of becoming landlords nowadays?
I think from what I'm hearing, some people want to get out of the industry. Like, as I said, a lot of people in the recession didn't up their rents, and then a lot of the big private companies came in and they set the bar at new levels, and with the rent pressures on, they couldn't up them. So for that reason alone, they just can't get out. They're squashed, and they can't get out. Some people feel they're being pushed out. But
Stephen, remind us again where people can go to get information on the meetup and where to attend.
First Tuesday every month in Sandymount Hotel.
Can anybody go?
Yeah, anyone can go.
We got to get out of here, I'm afraid, Stephen. That was Stephen O'Sullivan, PPN Dublin. Thanks for coming in to us today. So that's it from us in the studio today. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters, the show where property matters. Get in touch with the show by emailing hello@iproperty.com or on Twitter at iPropertyRadio.
Okay, again, I want to thank both of our guests for joining us in studio today. Also, thanks to Shane Flynn, who's on sound, and our producer, Katie Talon. We're back at the same time next week from Brian Fox and myself, Carol Talon. Have a great week.